He had everything money could buy. But Marcus Blackwood couldn't purchase what he wanted most: one more day with the woman he'd lost 3 years ago. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse as Marcus sat alone in his study, staring at the empty space where Elena's portrait used to hang. He'd removed it 6 months after the funeral, unable to bear the weight of her smile watching him slowly die inside. Now, only the faint outline on the wall remained, like a ghost refusing to be completely erased. At 42, Marcus controlled a tech empire worth $12 billion. His company, Blackwood Industries, dominated artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Presidents called him for advice. Harvard begged him to speak at their graduation ceremonies. Time magazine had named him Person of the Year twice. Yet none of that mattered on nights like this, when the silence in his penthouse grew so thick he could barely breathe. The storm outside matched the chaos in his mind. October 15th, 3 years to the day since Elena's accident. 3 years since the drunk driver had stolen his wife, his unborn child, and every reason he'd had to believe the world was good. Marcus reached for the glass of whiskey on his mahogany desk, his fingers trembling slightly as they had every day since the funeral. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress. He called it justice, his body's way of punishing him for surviving when Elena hadn't. His phone buzzed with the usual flood of messages, board meetings to schedule, deals worth hundreds of millions requiring his signature, invitations to galas where Manhattan's elite would pretend to care about whatever cause was fashionable this month. He ignored them all. Money had become meaningless when the only person he'd wanted to spend it on was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. The intercom crackled to life. "Mr. Blackwood?" His assistant's voice cut through the storm's roar. "Your car is ready for the cemetery visit." Marcus closed his eyes. Every year on this date, he made the same pilgrimage. Flowers for Elena's grave. Hours of one-sided conversation where he apologized for things that weren't his fault and begged for forgiveness that would never come. Then home to drink himself into unconsciousness, hoping tomorrow would hurt less than today. "Cancel it," he said quietly. "Sir? But you always—" "I said cancel it." His voice carried the edge that had made him famous in boardrooms across the world. The edge that had also driven away every friend who'd tried to help him heal. The intercom fell silent. Marcus turned back to the window, watching the city blur through sheets of rain. New York looked different now. Grayer, colder, like someone had drained all the color from his world the day Elena died. He'd built an empire in this city, conquered markets that others said were impossible to break. But he couldn't conquer the emptiness that lived where his heart used to be. A flash of lightning illuminated the street 40 floors below, and Marcus froze. A woman stood on the sidewalk across from his building, perfectly still despite the torrential rain. She wore a white dress that should have been soaked through, but somehow seemed to glow in the storm's darkness. Her long, dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and even from this impossible distance, Marcus could see she was looking directly up at his window. His breath caught in his throat. The posture, the hair, the way she held her head slightly tilted to the left. It was exactly how Elena used to stand when she was thinking about something important. Marcus pressed his face against the glass, his heart hammering against his ribs. The woman raised her hand and waved, a small, familiar gesture that made his legs nearly give out beneath him. It couldn't be. Elena was dead. He'd held her broken body in the hospital. He'd kissed her goodbye as the machines fell silent. He'd watched them lower her coffin into the ground on a day so cold his tears had frozen on his cheeks. But the woman on the street looked exactly like his wife. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, Marcus saw her smile. The same soft, mysterious smile Elena had given him on their wedding day when she'd whispered that she had a secret to tell him later. A secret she'd never lived long enough to share. What happened next would change everything. The woman turned and began walking down the street, her white dress flowing behind her like water. Without thinking, Marcus grabbed his coat and ran for the elevator, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt like an eternity. His reflection in the polished metal doors showed a man who'd aged 10 years in 3. Gray threading through his black hair, lines carved deep around his green eyes, the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. Elena used to joke that he was too handsome for his own good. Now he looked like a ghost haunting his own life. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus burst into the lobby, startling the night security guard who'd never seen his reclusive boss move faster than a dignified walk. "Mr. Blackwood, is everything all right?" Marcus didn't answer. He pushed through the revolving door and into the storm, the rain immediately soaking through his expensive suit. The cold shocked his system, but he barely noticed. His eyes scanned the street desperately, searching for a flash of white in the darkness. There, half a block away, moving toward Central Park. The woman in the white dress walked with Elena's graceful stride, unhurried despite the storm, as if she had all the time in the world. "Elena!" Marcus called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Elena, wait!" The woman didn't turn around, but she didn't speed up either. She simply continued walking, leading him deeper into the night. Marcus followed, his leather shoes slipping on the wet pavement as he struggled to keep pace. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built a business empire through logic and careful analysis, screamed that this was impossible. Grief-induced hallucination, stress-related psychosis, a cruel trick of light and shadow and desperate longing. But his heart didn't care about logic. His heart only knew that the woman ahead of him moved like Elena, held her shoulders like Elena, walked with the same quiet confidence that had first attracted him at a charity gala 7 years ago. She led him through streets he'd walked with Elena during their courtship, past the little Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date, by the bookstore where she'd spent Saturday mornings reading poetry while he worked on his laptop in the corner, through the park where he'd proposed on a spring evening when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. Each location hit him like a physical blow. Memories he'd spent 3 years trying to suppress came flooding back with devastating clarity. Elena laughing at his terrible jokes. Elena crying during movies she'd seen a dozen times. Elena in their bed on lazy Sunday mornings, sunlight streaming through the windows as she traced patterns on his chest and planned their future together. The woman in white turned down a narrow alley Marcus had never noticed before. Despite living in this neighborhood for over a decade, the buildings seemed older here, their brick facades weathered by time and rain. Gas lamps flickered along the path, impossible in modern Manhattan, but there they were, casting dancing shadows on the wet stones. Marcus hesitated at the alley's entrance. Every instinct told him to turn back, to return to his penthouse and pretend this night had never happened. But the woman had stopped at the far end of the alley and was looking back at him, her face partially hidden in shadow. "Elena," he whispered. She raised her hand again, beckoning him forward. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped into the alley. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the sounds of the city disappeared. No traffic, no sirens, no hum of 8 million people living their lives in vertical communities. Only the gentle patter of rain on old brick and the soft echo of his footsteps on cobblestones that belonged to a different century. As he walked deeper into the alley, Marcus noticed details that defied explanation. The gas lamps burned without any visible fuel source. The rain fell everywhere except where the woman stood, as if an invisible umbrella protected her from the storm. And the air itself felt different, thicker, charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning overhead. The woman waited until he was only a few feet away before speaking. "You look tired, Marcus." Her voice was Elena's voice, soft and warm with just a hint of the southern accent she'd picked up during her childhood in Georgia. The sound of it nearly brought him to his knees. "You're not real," he said, his voice barely audible above the rain. "You can't be real." She smiled sadly. "Does it matter? You followed me anyway." Marcus studied her face in the flickering gaslight. Every feature was exactly as he remembered. The high cheekbones, the full lips, the deep brown eyes that had always seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed defenses. But there was something different too. A translucent quality to her skin, as if she were made of moonlight and memory. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you here?" "Because you've forgotten how to live," she said simply. And because there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you before." She trailed off, her expression growing troubled. Marcus reached out to touch her face, but his fingers passed through empty air. She was there and not there, real and impossible. Everything he'd dreamed of and everything he feared. "Before what?" he pressed. Elena looked down at her hands, and for the first time since she'd appeared, she seemed uncertain. "Before the accident, there was something I'd been trying to find the right time to tell you. Something important." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "What kind of something?" Instead of answering, Elena held out her hand, palm up. In the center of her palm sat a ring, his wedding ring, the platinum band he'd thrown into the Hudson River the night of her funeral because he couldn't bear to wear it anymore. "You lost this," she said. "I didn't lose it, I threw it away." The words came out harsher than he'd intended. "You were gone. What was the point of wearing a wedding ring when there was no marriage left to represent? Wasn't there?" Elena's eyes met his, and he saw forgiveness there. Forgiveness he didn't deserve. "Just because I died doesn't mean I stopped loving you, Marcus. Just because you can't see me doesn't mean I haven't been watching over you." "Watching me what? Watching me destroy everything we built together? Watching me push away everyone who tried to help? Watching me become a ghost in my own life?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "If you've been watching, then you know I'm not worth saving." "You're wrong." Elena stepped closer, and this time when she reached out, her hand felt solid against his cheek. "You're so wrong, my love. But you can't see it because you've been carrying guilt that was never yours to bear." The warmth of her touch was everything he remembered and everything he'd missed. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to lean into it, to pretend that somehow the universe had given him back the only person who'd ever made him feel complete. "The accident wasn't your fault," Elena continued, her thumb brushing away tears he didn't realize he'd been crying. "The meeting that kept you late that night, the work call that delayed you, none of that caused what happened. A drunk driver ran a red light. It had nothing to do with you. But if I'd been there, then we both would have died." Her voice was firm now, carrying the no-nonsense tone she'd used when they'd argued about him working too much. "And our baby would have died too." Marcus went rigid. "What baby?" Elena's hand dropped from his face and she took a step back. The uncertainty returned to her expression along with something that looked like regret. "That was the secret," she said quietly. "What I'd been trying to tell you. I was pregnant, Marcus. 6 weeks along. I'd found out that morning and spent the whole day planning how to surprise you with the news." The alley spun around Marcus as the words hit him. A baby. Elena had been carrying their child and he'd never known. All these years of mourning one loss when it had actually been two. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he whispered. "I wanted it to be perfect. I had this whole elaborate plan involving your favorite dinner and the baby booties I'd bought during my lunch break. But then the meeting ran late, and you called to say you'd be home after midnight, and I thought..." She shrugged helplessly. "I thought it could wait until morning. I thought we had all the time in the world." Marcus sank to his knees on the wet cobblestones, overwhelmed by grief that somehow felt both brand new and 3 years old. Elena knelt beside him, her white dress pooling around them like spilled milk. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, but I needed you to know before I could let go." "Let go?" Marcus looked up at her in panic. "No, Elena, no. If you're here, if this is real, then maybe..." "This isn't about me coming back, Marcus." Her voice was gentle but final. "This is about you learning to live without me. Really live, not just exist." She held out the wedding ring again, and this time Marcus took it. The metal was warm against his palm, solid and real in a way that made no sense given where it had come from. "I need you to promise me something," Elena said. "Anything. I need you to forgive yourself for surviving, for being late that night, for all the ways you think you failed me. And then I need you to find a way to be happy again." Marcus shook his head violently. "I can't. Elena, I can't just move on like you didn't matter. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying our love forward instead of burying it with my body." She reached out and covered his hand with both of hers. "You have so much love left to give, Marcus. Don't waste it on guilt and self-destruction." The rain was slowing now, and with it the gaslight seemed to grow dimmer. Elena's form became more translucent, like she was fading back into whatever realm she'd emerged from. "Wait," Marcus said desperately. "Please don't go yet. I have so many questions, so many things I need to tell you." "I know," Elena said softly. "But my time here is almost up. The veil between worlds only lifts for so long, even on anniversary nights like this." She stood up, and Marcus scrambled to his feet as well, still clutching the wedding ring. "Will I see you again?" Elena smiled, and for a moment she looked solid again, as real and beautiful as the day he'd married her. "Not like this. But every time you choose love over fear, every time you help someone else heal, every time you remember that life is precious and short and meant to be lived fully, I'll be there." She started to turn away, but Marcus grabbed her arm. His hand passed through her, but she stopped anyway. "I love you," he said. "I'll always love you." "I know," she replied, "and I'll always love you too. But Marcus, the woman you're meant to love next, she's going to need you to love her with your whole heart. Not just the pieces I didn't take with me." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Elena began walking toward the end of the alley. With each step she took, she became more transparent, until she was nothing more than a shimmer in the air. Just before she disappeared completely, she turned back one last time. "Live, Marcus," she whispered. "Live for both of us." And then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone in an alley that was slowly transforming back into ordinary Manhattan. The gas lamps flickered out one by one, replaced by modern streetlights. The cobblestones beneath his feet became regular concrete. The silence gave way to the familiar sounds of traffic and sirens and life continuing, whether he participated in it or not. But the wedding ring in his palm remained solid and real, warm with Elena's touch and heavy with the weight of promises he now understood he needed to keep. Marcus stood in the rain for a long time, processing everything that had happened. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as an elaborate hallucination brought on by grief and anniversary-triggered stress. But the ring in his hand said otherwise. The ring said that some things were too important to be explained away by logic and rationality. Elena had come back to set him free. Not from loving her, but from the guilt and self-destruction that had turned that love into a prison. She'd given him the hardest gift imaginable: permission to live again. As Marcus finally made his way back to his building, he noticed things he'd missed on his way out. A homeless veteran sitting in a doorway, holding a cardboard sign asking for help. A late-night diner where an elderly man sat alone at the counter, staring into a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. A young woman hurrying down the sidewalk, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. People. Everywhere around him, people were struggling and surviving and searching for connection in a world that could be cruel and random and devastating. For 3 years, Marcus had been so focused on his own pain that he'd forgotten he wasn't the only one carrying impossible burdens. Elena was right. He had love left to give. The question was whether he had the courage to risk giving it. Back in his penthouse, Marcus sat in his study with the wedding ring on the desk in front of him. The storm was finally passing, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and scattered with stars he hadn't noticed in years. He thought about Elena's final words, about the woman he was meant to love next, about needing to love her with his whole heart. The idea of loving someone else still felt like betrayal, but maybe that was exactly the point. Maybe the greatest act of love he could perform for Elena's memory was to prove that the love she'd taught him was strong enough to survive even death. Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in 2 years. Dr. Sarah Chen, the grief counselor his lawyer had recommended after Elena's death. Marcus had attended exactly 3 sessions before deciding that talking about his feelings was a waste of time that wouldn't bring his wife back. Now he realized he'd been asking the wrong question. It wasn't about bringing Elena back. It was about becoming worthy of the love she'd given him, and finding a way to honor that love by living the kind of life she would have wanted him to live. He typed out a text message. "Dr. Chen, this is Marcus Blackwood. I know it's been a long time, but I think I'm ready to start healing. Can we schedule an appointment? He hesitated for only a moment before hitting send. Then he slipped the wedding ring onto his right hand, not as a symbol of marriage, but as a reminder of promises that transcended death and love that was strong enough to set him free. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the horizon. A new day was coming, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus thought he might be ready to meet it. 3 months later, Marcus sat in Dr. Chen's office for what had become his weekly ritual of carefully excavating the wreckage of his emotional life. The grief counselor's space was nothing like his sterile penthouse. Warm earth tones, soft lighting, and walls lined with books that had clearly been read rather than chosen for their aesthetic value. "You mentioned last week that you've been having dreams about Elena," Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying the patient professionalism that had gradually earned Marcus's trust. "Different from the nightmares you used to have. Can you tell me more about that?" Marcus shifted in the leather armchair that had become as familiar as his own furniture over the past 12 weeks. The dreams were different now. Less desperate, less haunted by what-ifs and regrets. Instead of reliving the accident or their final argument about his work schedule, he found himself dreaming of conversations with Elena, where she encouraged him to take risks he'd been too afraid to consider. "She keeps telling me to pay attention," Marcus said slowly, "to look for signs that I'm moving in the right direction. Last night she said something about not being afraid to let people surprise me." Dr. Chen made a note in her file. "How do you interpret that?" "Honestly, I think my subconscious is trying to push me toward something I'm not ready for." Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit that had developed since he'd started therapy. "I've been thinking about the foundation." The Elena Blackwood Foundation had been Marcus's first concrete step toward healing, using a significant portion of his wealth to support programs for accident victims and their families. Felt like a way to transform his grief into something meaningful. But lately the foundation had become more than just a charitable tax write-off. It had become a reason to get out of bed. "The children's art therapy program starts next week," Marcus continued. "I've been thinking about visiting. Actually meeting some of the kids we're helping instead of just writing checks and reviewing reports." Dr. Chen smiled. "That sounds like a significant step. What's holding you back?" "Fear, mostly." Marcus's honesty still surprised him sometimes. 3 months ago, he would have rather cut off his own hand than admit vulnerability to a stranger. "What if I'm not good with them? What if seeing kids who've lost parents just reminds me of our baby? What if I break down and traumatize a bunch of children who are already dealing with enough trauma?" "What if you don't?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "What if you discover you're stronger than you think? What if helping them actually helps you heal?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Through the office window, he could see Central Park, where autumn was painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson. 3 months ago, he'd seen only gray. Now color was slowly seeping back into his world, like a photograph developing in reverse. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. The usual corporate emergencies that used to consume every waking moment now felt manageable, even mundane. Quarterly reports and merger negotiations seemed less important when weighed against the possibility of meaningful human connection. "There's something else," Marcus said suddenly. "Something I haven't told you about that night." Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "Elena told me about someone, another woman. She said I was meant to love someone else, someone who would need me to love her with my whole heart." The words felt strange in his mouth, like speaking a foreign language he was still learning. "I keep wondering if that was real, or just my mind trying to give me permission to move on. Does it matter which it was?" Marcus considered the question. In his business life, the difference between reality and wishful thinking could cost millions of dollars. But here, in the realm of healing and hope, maybe the distinction was less important than the message itself. "I suppose not," he admitted. "But if Elena was right, if there is someone out there who's meant to be part of my future, how am I supposed to recognize her? How do I know when I'm ready?" Before Dr. Chen could answer, her receptionist knocked on the door. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been an emergency with the Riverside Children's Center. They're asking for Mr. Blackwood specifically. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The Children's Center was one of the foundation's primary beneficiaries, providing support for kids who'd lost parents in accidents. What kind of emergency? There was a fire in their main building this morning. No one was hurt, but they've lost most of their art supplies and therapy materials. The director is asking if the foundation can provide emergency funding for replacements. Without hesitation, Marcus stood up. Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes and call my financial team. I want to know how quickly we can get them whatever they need. Dr. Chen watched him with interest. You're not even questioning the cost or asking for a detailed budget proposal. Kids who've already lost their parents shouldn't have to lose their safe space too, Marcus said simply. Money can't fix everything, but it can fix this. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood outside the Riverside Children's Center, watching firefighters pack up their equipment while a group of children and staff members huddled together on the sidewalk. The building was still standing, but the acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. Mr. Blackwood? A woman in her 30s approached him, her clothes smudged with soot and her expression exhausted but determined. I'm Lisa Rodriguez, the center's director. Thank you for coming so quickly. Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. In his business world, he'd learned to read people within seconds of meeting them. Lisa Rodriguez projected competence under pressure and the kind of quiet strength that came from dedicating your life to protecting children. How bad is the damage? And he asked. The structure is sound, but we lost our entire art therapy room. 3 months of the children's work, all the supplies, even the specialized furniture designed for trauma counseling. Lisa's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the grief in her eyes. These kids have already lost so much. That room was where they felt safe enough to express their pain. Marcus looked past her to the children gathered on the sidewalk. They ranged in age from maybe 5 to 15, and even from a distance, he could see the hollow look he recognized from his own mirror. The look of people who'd learned too young that the world wasn't safe, that the people you loved could disappear without warning. One child in particular caught his attention, a girl who couldn't have been more than 7, standing slightly apart from the group while clutching a charred piece of paper. Even from where he stood, Marcus could see she was trying not to cry. What did she lose? He asked quietly. Lisa followed his gaze. That's Sophie. She's been with us for 6 months since her parents died in a car accident. That paper she's holding is all that's left of a painting she'd been working on for weeks. It was a portrait of her family. Something twisted in Marcus's chest. Without thinking, he walked toward the little girl, leaving Lisa behind. As he got closer, he could see that Sophie's painting had been a child's attempt to recreate a happy memory. Stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun with "My Family" written in crayon across the top. Hi, Marcus said quietly, crouching down to Sophie's eye level. I'm Marcus. I heard about your painting. Sophie looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. It's ruined, she said simply. Everything's ruined. I know it feels that way, Marcus said, surprised by how naturally the words came. I lost something important too a few years ago. For a long time, I thought everything was ruined. What did you lose? My wife, and a baby I never got to meet. Sophie studied his face with the serious attention children reserved for adults who talk to them like real people, instead of objects to be managed. Did you get them back? No, Marcus admitted. Some things can't be replaced. But you know what I learned? The love doesn't get ruined even when everything else does. The love stays. Sophie looked down at her damaged painting. I can't remember my dad's voice anymore. I try, but I can't remember what he sounded like when he read me bedtime stories. Marcus felt tears threaten. Not the bitter tears of self-pity he'd shed for 3 years, but something cleaner and more purposeful. Would you like to tell me about him? Sometimes talking about the people we love helps us remember them better. For the next hour, Marcus sat on the sidewalk with Sophie while she told him about her parents. Her father, who made pancakes shaped like animals every Sunday morning. Her mother, who sang off-key lullabies and left little notes in her lunchbox. The camping trips and birthday parties and ordinary moments that had seemed unremarkable until they became precious memories. Other children gradually joined their impromptu circle on the sidewalk. Marcus found himself listening to stories of loss and resilience that humbled him completely. These kids had survived tragedies that would have broken most adults, yet they still possessed a capacity for hope that he'd thought was lost forever. "Mr. Blackwood?" Lisa appeared beside him as the afternoon light began to fade. "The insurance adjuster is here if you'd like to speak with him about the damage assessment." Marcus stood up, his expensive suit now wrinkled and dusty from sitting on concrete. "Actually, I have a different idea. How quickly can we get a temporary art therapy space set up?" "That depends on budget and—" "No budget limits," Marcus interrupted. "I want the best art therapy equipment money can buy, plus furniture specifically designed for children dealing with trauma. And I want it set up within 48 hours. Lisa stared at him. "Mr. Blackwood, that would cost whatever it costs." Marcus looked back at Sophie, who was now showing another child how to carefully preserve what remained of her painting. These kids have waited long enough to feel safe again. As Marcus made calls to set the emergency funding in motion, he noticed Lisa watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. When he finished arranging for contractors to work around the clock and art supply companies to deliver their entire inventory, she approached him again. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "I mean, the foundation's support has been generous, but this is personal. You spent an hour sitting on a sidewalk talking to children you'd never met. You're committing hundreds of thousands of dollars without requiring a single form or financial justification." Marcus considered her question. 6 months ago, he would have had a prepared corporate answer about social responsibility and brand reputation. Now he found himself telling the truth. "Because 3 years ago I forgot that other people existed beyond my own pain. I turned my grief into a fortress that kept everyone out, including the people who needed help." He gestured toward the children, who were now being loaded onto buses to take them to a temporary location. "These kids lost their parents, but they haven't lost their ability to love and trust and hope. They're braver than I've ever been." Lisa smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A checkbook with legs. Maybe a photo opportunity for your corporate PR team." She paused, studying his face in the dying light. "But you got soot on your $1,000 suit and didn't even notice. You knew Sophie's name after talking to her for 5 minutes. You listened to Tommy's story about his grandmother like it was the most important thing you'd ever heard." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. They are important. Their stories matter. Yes, they do. But most people don't see that. Most donors want to feel good about helping without actually having to witness the pain they're trying to heal. Something in Lisa's voice caught Marcus's attention. There was a story behind her words, a personal understanding of loss that went beyond professional compassion. "You've been there," he said. It wasn't a question. Lisa nodded slowly. "My younger brother, drunk driver, just like most of the kids here. I was supposed to pick him up from soccer practice that day, but I had a date. I told him to walk home." She shrugged, but Marcus could see the weight she carried. "I started this center 5 years ago because I needed to believe that something good could come from senseless loss." "How old was he?" 12. He would have been 22 next month." Lisa's voice remained steady, but Marcus recognized the careful control of someone who'd learned to function despite carrying unbearable grief. They stood in comfortable silence as the last of the emergency vehicles departed, and the street began to return to normal. But Marcus felt something shifting inside him, a recognition that went beyond shared trauma. Lisa Rodriguez wasn't just someone who understood loss. She was someone who'd transformed her pain into purpose, exactly what Elena had been encouraging him to do. "The new art therapy room," Marcus said suddenly. "I'd like to help design it. Not just fund it, but actually be involved in creating something that works for the kids." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You have experience in therapeutic space design?" "No, but I have experience in trauma, and I have resources you need." Marcus surprised himself with his next words. "Plus, I think Elena would approve." "Elena." My wife, the one I lost. She believed that healing happens in community, not in isolation. Marcus looked back at the damaged building where children would soon return to process their grief through art and story and human connection. I've been trying to heal alone for 3 years. Maybe it's time I tried a different approach. Lisa extended her hand. Partners? Marcus shook it, feeling something he hadn't experienced since Elena's death, the stirring of purpose that went beyond mere survival. Partners. As they walked toward their respective cars, Lisa turned back to him. Marcus, what you did today, the way you talked to those kids, that wasn't charity. That was love in action. Elena would definitely approve. Driving home through the city streets, Marcus found himself thinking about Dr. Chen's question from earlier. How would he know when he was ready to love again? How would he recognize the person Elena had told him about? Maybe the answer wasn't about recognition at all. Maybe it was about readiness. His readiness to see beyond his own pain, to risk caring about people who might be taken away, to choose connection over safety. For 3 years, Marcus had been waiting for a sign that it was okay to rejoin the world of the living. Today, sitting on a sidewalk with a 7-year-old girl who'd lost everything but still believed in hope, he'd realized the sign had been there all along. It was the simple act of choosing love over fear, one conversation at a time. As he pulled into his building's garage, Marcus noticed he was still wearing Elena's wedding ring on his right hand. But for the first time since that night in the rain, it felt less like a chain binding him to the past and more like a compass pointing toward an unknown but hopeful future. The woman Elena had spoken of might not have appeared yet, but Marcus was beginning to understand that preparing for love meant learning to love the people already in his life. Broken children who needed someone to listen, dedicated social workers who carried their own grief and maybe even himself. Even tomorrow he would return to the children's center, not as a distant benefactor but as someone committed to the messy, painful, beautiful work of healing in community. And maybe, if he was very lucky, he would discover that the capacity for love Elena had awakened in him was strong enough to create the kind of future she would have wanted them both to live. 6 months after the fire, Marcus stood in the new art therapy room watching Sophie put the finishing touches on a painting that had taken her weeks to complete. This time, instead of stick figures, she'd created a detailed portrait of her family with careful attention to the colors of her mother's eyes and the shape of her father's smile. "It's perfect," Marcus said quietly, crouching beside her easel. Sophie beamed with pride. "Lisa taught me how to mix the colors just right. She said you can't paint someone's love unless you remember exactly how it looked." Marcus glanced across the room where Lisa was helping another child work through a sculpture, representing his feelings about losing his grandmother. Over the past months, he'd watched her transform this space into something magical, a place where children felt safe enough to explore their deepest pain and somehow find beauty in the process. The new facility was everything Marcus had envisioned and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light. Comfortable seating areas encouraged both individual work and group activities. State-of-the-art supplies gave the children tools to express emotions they didn't yet have words for. But the real magic wasn't in the expensive equipment. It was in Lisa's ability to create an atmosphere of unconditional acceptance. "Marcus?" Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "Are you coming to the art show next week?" The Children's Center was hosting its first annual exhibition, displaying artwork created by kids dealing with loss. Marcus had initially planned to attend as a board member, making a brief appearance, but somewhere along the way, these children had become genuinely important to him. "I wouldn't miss it," he said. "Will your family painting be in the show?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Lisa says it's one of the best pieces she's ever seen. She says I'm a real artist now." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he thought about the child he and Elena would never have. But it was different now, less bitter, more bittersweet. These children couldn't replace the family he'd lost, but they'd taught him that love wasn't a finite resource. Caring about Sophie didn't diminish his love for Elena. It honored it. "Mr. Blackwood?" Lisa appeared beside him. her voice carrying the gentle, professional tone she used when the children were nearby. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" They stepped into the hallway, leaving Sophie to continue perfecting her masterpiece. Over the months of working together, Marcus had learned to read Lisa's expressions. Right now she looked worried. "What's wrong?" he asked. "We got word this morning that our primary state funding is being cut by 60%. Budget crisis at the state level." Lisa ran her hand through her dark hair, a gesture Marcus had noticed she made when trying to solve problems that seemed impossible. "Without that funding, we'll have to close 3 of our outreach programs and lay off half our staff." Marcus felt a surge of protective anger. These children had already lost their parents, they couldn't lose their support system too. "How much do you need?" "Marcus, it's not that simple. This isn't about emergency funding for equipment. We're talking about operational costs, salaries, long-term sustainability." Lisa leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "The state funding was supposed to be reliable. We built our entire program around that security." "How much?" Marcus repeated. Lisa sighed and named a figure that represented a significant portion of the center's annual budget. In the context of Marcus's wealth, it was a rounding error. In the context of these children's lives, it was everything. "Consider it done," Marcus said without hesitation. "You can't just keep writing checks to solve every crisis we face," Lisa protested. "What happens when you get tired of this? What happens when helping traumatized children isn't fulfilling anymore and you move on to the next charitable cause?" Her words hit Marcus harder than she probably intended. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Playing at philanthropy until I get bored?" "I think you're a good man who's trying to heal from his own trauma by fixing other people's problems," Lisa said quietly. "But Marcus, these kids need stability. They need to know that the people they depend on won't disappear without warning. They've already learned that lesson once." Marcus stared at her, realizing that somewhere in the past months, Lisa had become more than a professional colleague. Her opinion mattered to him in a way that went beyond their shared work. The thought that she saw him as unreliable, as someone who might abandon these children when the novelty wore off, cut deep. "You think I'm going to leave?" he said. "I think you're at a crossroads," Lisa replied. "You've spent the last year learning how to engage with the world again, but you haven't decided what you want your place in that world to be. The foundation work, the time you spend here, it's all been part of your healing process. But what happens when you're healed? What happens when you're ready to move on to the next chapter of your life?" Before Marcus could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Lisa, my painting is dry now. Can you help me sign it?" "Of course, sweetheart." Lisa's voice immediately softened, and she followed Sophie back into the art room, leaving Marcus alone in the hallway with questions he wasn't sure how to answer. That evening, Marcus sat in his study staring at Elena's portrait, which he'd recently rehung on the wall. Dr. Chen had suggested that hiding from reminders of Elena wasn't the same as healing from her loss. Now the painting served as a comfortable presence rather than a source of pain. "What am I supposed to do here?" he asked the portrait, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to an oil painting. "Lisa thinks I'm going to abandon those kids. Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't know how to commit to anything anymore." His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant about a board meeting scheduled for the following morning. Blackwood Industries continued to run efficiently despite his reduced involvement, but Marcus knew his investors were getting nervous about his shift in priorities. Profit margins and market expansion seemed increasingly irrelevant when weighed against Sophie's need for art supplies and Tommy's progress in learning to trust adults again. Marcus picked up the business proposal he'd been reviewing earlier, a potential acquisition that would expand his company's artificial intelligence capabilities and likely increase his net worth by another $1 billion. The numbers were impressive, the strategic advantages clear, but he felt nothing looking at the projections. The excitement that had once driven him to build an empire had been replaced by a different kind of satisfaction. He thought about his conversation with Lisa, about her concern that he would eventually tire of working with traumatized children. Was she right? Was his involvement at the center just another phase in his grief process, something he would outgrow once he'd successfully rebuilt his life? The answer came to him as he remembered Sophie's face when she'd shown him her family portrait. The pure joy of a child who'd found a way to preserve her love for people who were gone forever. That moment hadn't been about his healing. It had been about hers. And witnessing it had felt more important than every business deal he'd ever closed. Marcus reached for his laptop and began typing an email to his legal team. If Lisa was worried about the center's long-term stability, he would give her the kind of security that couldn't be revoked by budget cuts or economic downturns. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the Children's Center with a folder full of legal documents and a nervous energy he hadn't felt since his first business presentation. He found Lisa in her office, reviewing case files for children on their waiting list. "I have a proposal for you," he said without preamble. Lisa looked up from her files, taking in his formal business attire and serious expression. "If this is about the funding shortage, I told you we'll figure something out." "It's not about the shortage. It's about the center's entire financial future." Marcus sat down across from her desk and opened his folder. "I want to establish a permanent endowment that will fully fund this facility in perpetuity. No more dependence on state funding or annual donations. Complete financial independence." Lisa stared at him. "Marcus, that would require $50 million, he finished, "which I'm prepared to donate immediately, with the funds held in trust and managed by a board of directors that includes both of us." $50 million, Lisa repeated faintly. "The interest alone will cover operational costs, staff salaries, facility maintenance, and program expansion for the next century." Marcus leaned forward, his business training taking over. "But there's a condition." Lisa's expression grew wary. "What kind of condition?" "I want a permanent position here, not as a donor or board member, but as a full-time staff member. I want to work directly with the children, learn proper therapeutic techniques, become someone they can depend on long-term. You want to become a grief counselor? I want to become whatever these kids need me to be," Marcus said simply. "Lisa, you were right yesterday. I have been using this work as part of my healing process. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. These children have taught me things about resilience and hope that I never learned in all my years of business success." Lisa studied his face with the same careful attention she gave to evaluating children's emotional states. "What about your company? You're the CEO of a $12 billion corporation. I'm stepping down as CEO. I'll remain on the board of directors, but day-to-day operations will be handled by my leadership team." Marcus had made this decision while staring at Elena's portrait the night before. Blackwood Industries was my way of proving I was worthy of Elena's love. But she already thought I was worthy. I was the one who needed convincing. And now I want to spend my time doing work that Elena would recognize as reflecting the man she fell in love with, the man who cared more about people than profit margins. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. "Marcus, this is incredibly generous, but I need to know you've thought this through. Working with traumatized children isn't glamorous. There are setbacks and heartbreak and days when nothing you do seems to make a difference. There are also days like yesterday when Sophie finished her painting and looked prouder of herself than I've ever felt about any business achievement." Marcus met her eyes directly. "I'm not asking for a trial period or a temporary arrangement. I'm asking for the chance to commit to something that matters for the rest of my life." "What about the woman Elena told you about? The one you're supposed to love with your whole heart?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Over the months of working together, he'd shared many details of his journey with Lisa, including Elena's final message about finding love again. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe she doesn't exist. Maybe Elena was just trying to give me permission to hope for a future I'm not actually meant to have." Lisa looked down at the legal documents he'd placed on her desk. "Or maybe she was trying to prepare you to recognize love when it appears in an unexpected form." Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more carefully. Lisa was an attractive woman. He'd noticed that months ago, but he'd been so focused on healing and helping the children that he hadn't allowed himself to think of her in romantic terms. Now, studying her face in the morning light streaming through her office window, he found himself seeing her differently. "Lisa," he began, then stopped, unsure how to voice what he was thinking. "I know," she said softly. "I've been wondering the same thing." "How long?" "Since the day you sat on the sidewalk with Sophie and listened to her like her story was the most important thing in the world." Lisa smiled, but there was uncertainty in her expression. "You looked nothing like the intimidating billionaire I'd been expecting. You looked like someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and still choose to care about other people." Marcus felt his heart racing in a way it hadn't since Elena's death. "I care about you," he said quietly. Somewhere in these past months, caring about the work became caring about the person who made it possible. "I care about you too," Lisa admitted. "But Marcus, this is complicated. We work together. These children depend on both of us, and you're still healing from losing Elena." "Elena told me I would need to love the next woman with my whole heart," Marcus said. "I think she meant love without reservation, without holding back parts of myself for fear of being hurt again." He paused, gathering courage. "I think she was preparing me for you." Lisa stood up and walked to her office window, looking out at the playground where children were laughing during their morning recreation time. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you would consider taking a chance on a man who spent 3 years learning how to be human again." Marcus joined her at the window. "I'm asking if you think we could build something together that honors both of our losses while creating space for new love." "The children will always come first," Lisa said firmly. "I wouldn't want it any other way. And you have to promise me you won't disappear when things get difficult. These kids have had enough people abandon them." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "Lisa, I've spent my entire adult life building things that last. This, us, the work we do here, the family we could create together. This is the most important thing I've ever wanted to build." Lisa turned to face him, and Marcus saw hope fighting with caution in her expression. "I've been alone for a long time. Since my brother died, I haven't trusted anyone enough to let them close. But watching you with these children, seeing how you've transformed your own pain into compassion for others, you make me want to risk hoping again, then say yes," Marcus said quietly. "Say yes to the endowment, to working together, to seeing what we could become if we're brave enough to try." Lisa looked back out at the playground where Sophie was showing her painting to another child, both of them beaming with pride and possibility. "Yes," she said simply. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening onto a future he'd never dared to imagine. When he kissed Lisa for the first time, standing in her office with the sounds of healing children drifting through the window, he could swear he felt Elena's approval wrapping around them like a blessing. The woman Elena had told him about hadn't appeared as a stranger in the rain. She'd appeared as a colleague who shared his commitment to transforming pain into purpose, someone who understood that the deepest love grows from the soil of shared service to others. As they held each other in the morning light, Marcus realized that Elena had been right about everything. Love did multiply rather than diminish. The heart he'd thought was too broken to function had somehow found room for Sophie's resilience, Tommy's trust, and now Lisa's quiet strength. The wedding ring on his right hand caught the sunlight streaming through the window. Soon, Marcus thought, he might be ready to wear a different ring on a different finger. But Elena's ring would remain where it was, not as a chain binding him to the past, but as a reminder that love, once given, never truly dies. It simply transforms into new possibilities for connection and grace. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the garden behind the children's center, watching Lisa adjust Sophie's veil for the 3rd time. The 8-year-old had insisted on being the flower girl for their wedding, declaring that anyone who could make both Marcus and Lisa smile the way they did when they looked at each other obviously belonged together. "You're fidgeting more than the bride," Dr. Chen observed, appearing beside Marcus in her role as an honored guest rather than his therapist. Their weekly sessions had evolved into monthly check-ins, then quarterly conversations, and finally into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect. "I keep thinking Elena should be here," Marcus admitted, straightening his tie for the 5th time. "Not instead of Lisa, but alongside her. Does that make sense?" Dr. Chen smiled. Perfect sense. You're not replacing Elena. You're honoring her by living the kind of life she wanted you to have. There's a difference. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the center's garden with only the children, staff members, and a handful of close friends in attendance. Marcus had offered to plan something elaborate and expensive, but Lisa had insisted that their celebration should reflect their shared values. Simple, meaningful, focused on the people who mattered most. Places everyone, called Tommy, now 9 years old and taking his role as ring-bearer with utmost seriousness. Over the past year, he'd become Marcus's unofficial assistant, helping with everything from organizing art supplies to greeting new children who arrived scared and broken. As the small group of guests settled into their seats among the flower beds Lisa had planted herself, Marcus felt a familiar presence. Not the desperate haunting of his early grief, but something warmer and more peaceful. Elena's approval, perhaps, or simply his own knowledge that he was finally becoming the man she'd always believed he could be. The ceremony was officiated by Pastor Williams from Elena's church, the same man who'd conducted her funeral service 4 years ago. Marcus had been surprised when Lisa suggested asking him, but she'd pointed out that their love story included Elena's role in preparing Marcus to love again. Honoring that connection felt right. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had comforted Marcus during his darkest hours. "We gather today to celebrate not just the union of Marcus and Lisa, but the beautiful truth that love multiplies rather than diminishes, that healing is possible, that second chances are among God's greatest gifts." Marcus looked out at the assembled guests and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Sophie sat in the front row wearing her carefully chosen dress, beaming with pride at being part of their special day. Tommy fidgeted with the ring box, clearly taking his responsibilities seriously. The other children from the center watched with the intense attention they reserved for important moments. But it was Lisa who captured Marcus's complete focus as she walked down the makeshift aisle between 2 rows of folding chairs. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that complemented her dark hair, and she carried a bouquet of white roses mixed with purple irises, Elena's favorite flowers, included at Marcus's request as a way of honoring the love that had made this new love possible. "You look beautiful," Marcus whispered as Lisa took her place beside him. "You look terrified," she whispered back with an amused smile. "I am terrified," he admitted. "Terrified and grateful and so full of love I don't know how my heart contains it all." Pastor Williams began the traditional wedding liturgy, but Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The night Elena had appeared in the rain to set him free from guilt. The months of therapy learning to forgive himself. The day he'd first walked into the children's center and discovered that healing happened in community, not in isolation. "The rings, please," Pastor Williams announced. Tommy stepped forward with careful ceremony, presenting the ring box with the solemnity of someone entrusted with precious cargo. As Marcus took out Lisa's wedding band, a simple platinum circle engraved with coordinates marking the location of the children's center where they'd found each other, he noticed Tommy watching him with curious intensity. "What is it, buddy?" Marcus asked quietly. "You're still wearing the other ring," Tommy observed with typical childhood directness. "The one from your first wife." A hush fell over the small gathering. Marcus looked down at Elena's wedding ring on his right hand, the ring she'd returned to him in the alley that had somehow existed between worlds. He'd worn it every day for the past 2 years, but he'd never explained its significance to the children. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the garden silence. "This ring belonged to Elena, my first wife. She died before I met any of you, but in a way, she's the reason we're all here together." Sophie raised her hand like she was in school. "Why do you still wear it if you're marrying Lisa now?" Marcus looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. They'd talked about this moment, wondering if and when the children would ask about Elena's place in their new family structure. "Because love doesn't end when someone dies," Marcus explained. "Elena will always be part of who I am, just like your parents will always be part of who you are. That doesn't make our love for each other any less real or special. It just means we have more love to share." "So you can love 2 people at the same time?" asked Maria, a 6-year-old who joined their center family 3 months ago. "I think you can love lots of people at the same time," Lisa said gently. "I love Marcus and I love all of you, and I loved my brother who died, and none of those loves cancel each other out. They all make me more loving, not less." Pastor Williams smiled at the impromptu family discussion happening in the middle of the ceremony. "Perhaps we should continue with the vows. I believe Marcus and Lisa have prepared something personal to share." Marcus took Lisa's hands, feeling the slight tremor in his own fingers that still appeared during moments of intense emotion. But this time, the tremor came from joy rather than grief. "Lisa," he began, "2 years ago, I was a man who had forgotten how to live. I existed in a world of my own making, built from guilt and isolation and the belief that I didn't deserve happiness. You didn't just help me remember how to be human, you showed me what it meant to transform pain into purpose." He paused, looking out at the children who had become such an essential part of his life. "You taught me that healing happens when we choose to care for others, even when we're still learning to care for ourselves. You showed me that the greatest love grows from shared service to something bigger than our own happiness." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I promise to love you with the whole heart Elena helped me rebuild. I promise to be a father to these children who've taught us both that family is created through choice and commitment, not just biology. And I promise to spend every day of our marriage honoring the love that brought us together by continuing the work that makes both of us better people." Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she began her own vows. "Marcus, when we first met, you were a man carrying impossible grief, who somehow still had room in his heart for children you'd never met. You sat on a sidewalk in your expensive suit and listened to Sophie's story like it was the most important thing you'd ever heard. In that moment, I knew you were someone worth taking a chance on." She looked at Elena's ring on his right hand, then back at his face. "I promise to honor the love Elena gave you, by helping you become everything she saw in you. I promise to build a family with you that includes her memory and these children and whatever the future brings us. And I promise to love you not despite your scars, but because of the way you've transformed them into compassion for others." Pastor Williams invited them to exchange rings, and as Marcus slipped the platinum band onto Lisa's finger, he felt a familiar presence in the garden. Not visible this time, but unmistakably real, Elena's blessing on this union that had grown from the seeds of her final gift to him. "By the power vested in me, and with the enthusiastic approval of this very special family," Pastor Williams announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet and tender, witnessed by children who cheered with unrestrained joy and adults who understood the miracle of second chances. As they broke apart, Sophie ran forward to hug them both, her face glowing with happiness. "Does this mean you're going to live together now?" she asked. "It means we're going to be a family," Lisa said, gathering Sophie into a hug that included Marcus. "All of us, together. Even the kids who aren't here yet, the ones who still need to find us." Marcus felt his heart expand at Sophie's question. Over the past year, their center had become a model for other facilities, and they'd begun training programs to help establish similar centers in other cities. Their family was growing beyond what they'd ever imagined possible. "Especially the kids who haven't found us yet," Marcus confirmed. "Our family has room for everyone who needs it." The reception was held in the center's main hall, with tables decorated by the children themselves, and a cake that Sophie had helped Lisa bake that morning. Instead of a traditional first dance, Marcus and Lisa led all the children in a group dance that dissolved into laughter and chaos within minutes. As the evening wound down and the children were taken home by staff members or to the residential wing of the facility, Marcus and Lisa found themselves alone in the garden where they'd been married hours earlier. "Any regrets?" Lisa asked, settling onto the bench Marcus had installed beneath Elena's memorial tree, a flowering dogwood planted in memory of his first wife and the child they'd never met. "Only that it took me 4 years to find my way here," Marcus said, pulling her close. "What about you?" "I regret that my brother didn't live to see this. He would have loved you." Lisa leaned against Marcus's shoulder, her wedding dress pooling around them like moonlight. "But I don't regret anything about today. even the part where Tommy dropped the rings and Sophie had to crawl under the chairs to find them. Marcus laughed, remembering the moment of chaos that had somehow made their ceremony more perfect rather than less. Elena would have loved this wedding. Simple, real, focused on the people who matter. "Tell me about her," Lisa said quietly. "Not the sad parts, the happy parts. What would she have thought of Sophie's performance today?" Marcus smiled, remembering Elena's love for children and her dream of the family they'd planned to build together. She would have said Sophie has natural comedic timing and should consider a career in entertainment. Elena always believed children were naturally wise about the things adults overcomplicate. Like love? Like love, Marcus agreed. Elena used to say that children understand love is meant to be shared, not hoarded. That the more you give away, the more you have. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city beyond the garden walls. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, ambulances carrying people to hospitals where other families would face the kinds of tragedies that had shaped both Marcus and Lisa. But here in their sanctuary, surrounded by evidence of healing and hope, those sounds seemed less terrifying and more like reminders of why their work mattered. "Marcus?" Lisa's voice was soft in the darkness. "Thank you for following a woman into the rain 4 years ago. Even if it broke your heart. Even if it took you this long to find your way back to living. That night started the journey that brought you here." Marcus looked up at the stars visible above the city lights, thinking about that impossible night when Elena had appeared to set him free from guilt and point him toward a future he couldn't yet imagine. The wedding ring on his right hand caught the moonlight, a reminder of love that transcended death and made new love possible. "Elena told me that night that I was meant to love someone who would need my whole heart," he said. "I thought she meant someone broken, who would need fixing. But she meant you. Someone strong enough to love me despite my scars, and wise enough to help me transform them into something beautiful." Lisa turned in his arms to face him. "We're going to have a good life together, aren't we?" "We're going to have the kind of life Elena dreamed of," Marcus said with quiet certainty. "Full of love and service and children who teach us that healing is always possible. Full of second chances and third chances, and as many chances as it takes." As they walked hand in hand toward their new home, the apartment they'd designed above the children's center so they would always be available when they were needed, Marcus felt Elena's presence one last time. Not as a ghost haunting his steps, but as a blessing following him into the future. The woman he'd followed into the rain had vanished, leaving only his wedding ring behind. But she'd also left something infinitely more precious, the knowledge that love was stronger than death, that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds, and that the human heart had an infinite capacity for hope. Behind them, the children's center stood ready for another day of transformation. Tomorrow, new children would arrive carrying fresh grief and tentative hope. Marcus and Lisa would be there to meet them, along with Sophie and Tommy and all the others who'd learned that family could be created from shared loss and mutual care. The haunted millionaire was haunted no more. In his place stood a man who'd learned to build his fortune not in financial markets, but in the currency of human connection. A man who'd discovered that the greatest riches came from loving without reservation and serving without counting the cost. Elena's ghost had led him into the rain that night to teach him the most important lesson of all. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get the chance to build something even more beautiful from the ruins of what you thought was gone forever. If this story moved you, the next one appearing on screen goes even deeper. Click and watch it now. And of course, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell, leave a comment, drop a like, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.